Hello, everyone. Once again, we are here back talking about Dana White privilege. Now, some of you guys at this point might be tired of me talking about this topic because I have talked about this many times before. But there's one thing I haven't discussed is that how justified some of these privileges are. Some guys, when you watch them, they're like, okay, they're kind of annoying with how much privilege they're getting when it comes to matchups, when it just comes to placement of fights on pay-per-views or main or like overall fight nights. But at least you kind of understand why. But some other guys, like, you just see them purely get in because they're fucking Indian or something, and then you just get pissed off because, they're not good, but they're here in the UFC still because they're from an ethnic minority group that the UFC is trying to cash in. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so starting off our list, we got Mike Malott. I'm putting him straight into DEI privileges. The only reason why Mike Malott is getting a main event versus Gilbert Burns this weekend is because the UFC desperately need Canadian prospects. And Mike Malott just happened to win a couple of fights that the UFC put as layups. So Mike Malott is their golden boy from Canada. Now, let's be honest here, although Mike Malott has improved since fighting Neil Magny, there are no such thing as title aspirations for Mike Malott realistically. He will probably lose in the near future, and it's just a matter of when. But yeah, Mike Malott, he is one of the most DEI privileged fighters on the roster. It is simply because he's from Canada that he keeps on getting favorable jumps up in competition. Now, moving on to Sean O'Malley, I kind of get it, Now, I'm not saying that everything is justified for Sean O'Malley. Like, him fighting anybody but Corey Sandhagen is kind of annoying because it kind of spells that the UFC is just very adamant about deterring Sean O'Malley away from all of the matchups that we actually want to see. That being said, though, I do think that Sean O'Malley is somewhat justified when it comes to his Dana White privilege. He actually knocked out Aljamain Sterling with one of the sickest step back right hands. And I do think that Sean O'Malley proved to be an elite level fighter after that fight. But also, he does get a lot of views on social media and he knows how to promote himself very well. So, I do like Sean O'Malley in general. It can get annoying at times whenever the UFC just gives Sean O'Malley favorable matchups like Chito Vera as his first title defense. But for the most part, I do think that Sean O'Malley has earned his privileges, which is why I kind of understand why Sean O'Malley gets better treatment than most of the fighters on the roster. All right, now moving on to Josh Hokit. Before the Curtis Blades fight, I was going to put him at kind of annoying. But after watching Curtis Blades and Josh Hokit just slug it out in the pocket for 15 minutes, I gotta respect Josh Hokit. At this point, he can do whatever he wants. Alright, at first I thought of him as a schizophrenic maniac who's very cringe to listen to. And although I knew that he was playing a character, but because he was so cringe, it just made me not want to root for him. That being said, though, Josh Hokit, after that Curtis Blades fight, have at it, all right? If the UFC need their loud, brash-talking cringe lord, then we need another brash-talking cringe lord in order to save the heavyweight division. All right, so for the most part, I understand why Josh Hokit is going to get favorable privileges moving on, and if he keeps on winning, I think it'll be completely justified as to why the UFC are very high on him. Now, moving on to Aaron Pico. Aaron Pico, I kind of find it annoying that the UFC just love the man to death because in his debut, he hasn't fought any sort of UFC fight, let alone a Dana White's Contender Series fight. Yet, for some reason, Aaron Pico was instantly given a title elimination bout versus Leroy Murphy, and he got slimed out in the first round. Then the UFC gave him Patricio Pitbull, which, alright, fair enough, but at the same time, though, it's very clear that the UFC want Aaron Pico to win, And fair enough, he can back it up at times, like when he fought Pitbull. I thought he was going to lose that fight. But it feels kind of manufactured in a way. It kind of gives me the Michael Chandler vibes, if Michael Chandler was actually good. So for that reason, I kind of find it annoying, but like I've started to somewhat understand after his performance against Patricio Pitbull, because he looked great in there, right? He looked like a world beater in there. Do I think he's going to be a champion in the featherweight division? Probably not, but who knows? Like he could shock us with a couple of upsets. So I kind of find it annoying, but I'm starting to understand as to why Aaron Pico's getting these privileges. All right, now moving on to Michael Chandler. I'm going to put Michael Chandler, I'm going to put him kind of annoying. Like, the only reason why I can tolerate this guy is because he's fun to watch, right? He is very fun to watch. Win or lose, although nowadays he's losing most of his fights. But other than that, though, this guy is kind of insufferable, and I hate the fact that he gets Dana White privilege every single day, because Michael Chandler, first off, he is propped up as an elite level lightweight that's been around in the UFC forever. Like, bro is 2-5 or 2-6 in the UFC. And he's also just been given name value matchups after name value matchups. He's never really fought anybody down the rankings and given someone the opportunity to get to the top. So I don't like Michael Chandler getting all of these privileges. That being said, though, he is fun to watch, so I get why the UFC is doing it, but it is very annoying at times. Now, moving on to Diego Lopes. Now, I understand that he's getting some DEI privileges because he represents Mexico, and the UFC are desperate for a Mexican champion. That being said, though, I kind of get it. Yeah, if anything, like I completely support it, because Diego Lopes, he's very active. He's always putting on fun fights, and that's the two best things you can have in any sort of UFC fighter that you want to follow. For that reason, I'm going to say that Diego Lopes, although he's been getting a lot of Dana White privileges as of recently, like fighting at the White House, getting a rematch against Volkanovski after one win, but I do understand it, and I will support it, because I am a big Diego Lopes fan, and Diego Lopes, like, it's hard not to like the guy. Moving on to Zhang Mingyang. I'm putting Zhang Mingyang in DEI privileges. Zhang Mingyang is basically their ticket to get into the Chinese market. Now, unfortunately, that ticket burnt to crisp once Johnny Walker leg kick TKO'd him. That being said, though, I do think that a lot of the privileges that Zhang Mingyang is going to get is solely because he is from China. He is getting another ranked opponent in Alonzo Menifield. Typically guys in his position that just got into the rankings after beating up the dead corpse of Anthony Smith. Typically, those guys are put to the chopping block. But Zhang Mingyang is given another opportunity against Alonzo Menifield simply because he is from China. And now moving on to Aimann Zahabi, another proponent of Dana White privilege. Now, I don't think it's as severe as Mike Malott's, because I do think that Aimann Zahabi is a pretty good fighter overall. That being said, though, I can't ignore the fact that the UFC is pushing a guy up to the top of the bantamweight division at the age of 37 simply because he's from Canada. Right? If this guy were to be from the U.S., he won't even sniff the rankings, because the UFC typically don't promote guys who come into the UFC in their mid-30s. That being said, though, I think of Aimann Zahabi as a solid fighter, so I'm not as annoyed with him compared to guys like Mike Malott and Raul Rosas Jr., who we will get to in a second. But I still can't ignore the fact that he has some DEI privileges, so I have to put him on this tier, even though I don't find it nearly as severe as the guy over here. Now, moving on to Raul Rosas Jr., I might put him at the top of the DEI privileges, because let's be honest here, if he wasn't from Mexico, would he still get the same traction? Like, I'm just saying. Now, I do understand that he is somewhat viral. He would say, "Chihuihuis." Like, let's be honest here. Like, does that really like should that really count as promotion? Like, I find it more cringe than anything, but I guess that's just me being a hater. But regardless, though, I don't understand why the UFC is so desperate to promote Raul Rosas Jr. as the next big thing. Like, yes, he's like 21 years old, but he's not gonna get far if we keep bumping him up in like massive jumps. So I don't understand why the UFC keeps doing this. And even though you can say, oh, Raul Rosas Jr. was known even before the UFC decided to go Viva la Mexico. Like, I get that, but ever since the UFC went Viva la Mexico, I feel like the privilege for Raul Rosas Jr. has honestly increased because he has been taking steps back in competition. And in his last fight, he got the dead corpse of Rob Font, who just looked completely washed out there. I would honestly pick a prime version of Rob Font to beat Raul Rosas Jr. But yeah, I think that's just me. Maybe I'm just hating, but I feel like Raul Rosas Jr. has basically been given a top opponent as well as favorable matchups simply because he's from Mexico. Now, moving on to Alex Pereira, I think he is completely justified when it comes to his Dana White privileges because Alex Pereira, over the last 5 to 6 years, has done great things for the sport. You know, he literally carried the year of 2024 on his back, so the man can do whatever he wants at this point. All right, so I understand that sometimes you find it annoying that, he's not fighting the guys that are, like, the most interesting or the most challenging. Like, I do kind of get the argument there, but at the same time, though, I think this is completely justified. Like, the fact that Alex Pereira is even in discussions for a third belt and could possibly be the first guy to hold 3 simultaneous belts, like, I think that's goated. All right, I think that's goated, and if the UFC needs to sprinkle on some Dana White privilege in order for that to happen, then by all means. All right, I think that's a great thing overall. Moving on to Anshul Jubli, I'm putting Anshul Jubli in DEI privileges. Let's be honest here, most guys in his position would have been cut from the roster by now, but because he is from India and the UFC are looking for decent fighters in India, that's why Anshul Jubli is still on the roster, right? I feel like if the UFC actually finds a decent Indian MMA fighter, Anshul Jubli would probably be cut from the roster as soon as possible because over the last couple of fights, he has kind of proven that he is not UFC caliber. So for that reason, I think that Anshul Jubli has a lot of DEI privileges. Now, moving on to Paddy Pimblett. You know what? I understand. I get why Paddy Pimblett is getting all of these privileges. Is it kind of annoying that sometimes he's fighting Justin Gaethje for the interim belt when Arman Tsarukyan is clearly there? Yes, I do find that very annoying. That being said, though, I think that Paddy Pimblett, he's kind of earned it in a way because although most of his matchups were very carefully picked by the UFC, I also do feel like Paddy Pimblett, he has a lot of name value. I feel like Paddy Pimblett, even the casuals know him. Like, I have a lot of friends who didn't really know much about the UFC coming into the year of 2026, but they know who Paddy Pimblett is. All right, so for the most part, I feel like Paddy Pimblett, although it is sometimes annoying whenever he's getting these favorable matchups, I also do feel like Paddy Pimblett has somewhat earned it, so I'm not going to say that it's the end of the world just because Paddy Pimblett is getting preferential treatment over other fighters. All right, now moving on, we got Ibo Aslan. Another guy who has a lot of DEI privileges. This one's from Turkey. All right, so like the UFC is desperately looking for Turkish prospects. Now, I don't think he's the worst guy by any means, but let's be honest here. A lot of people in his position would probably possibly get cut. Like, if this guy were from America, like, I would consider it a possibility considering he went 2-3 in the UFC. He got slept out in multiple fights. And overall, I just don't feel like Ibo Aslan has really proven that he's going to be like a ranked caliber fighter anytime soon. So most of those guys, the UFC would probably cut. But because he is from Turkey. The UFC automatically extended his contract to 6 fights. And overall, the UFC are desperately looking for more Turkish fighters. So for that reason, I have to include Ibo Aslan as someone who has a lot of DEI privileges. Now, moving on to Bo Nickal, I find it kind of annoying that Bo Nickal is getting all the privileges from Dana White. Oh, he's gonna be a big pay-per-view star. He can get the wrestling community in. Like, bro, nobody cares. Let's be honest here. Like, I feel like half the wrestling community would probably pirate this shit. But regardless of that, though, like Bo Nickal, despite losing to Rainer de Ritter, immediately the UFC thought, you know what we should do? We should put him on the main card of a pay-per-view on UFC 322, right? And fortunately, the fans actually backlashed against that so much that the UFC was forced to put Bo Nickal on the prelims. But that doesn't change the fact that the UFC are desperately trying to get Bo Nickal to the top of the sport. That being said, though, I do feel like Bo Nickal has improved from incrementally time to time. That being said, though, I also feel like Bo Nickal has improved his game incrementally. He went from looking like a complete victim against Rainer de Ritter to just outclassing Rodolfo Vieira from start to finish. I gotta respect that. Like, Rodolfo Vieira is no joke. So, for that reason, I do find it still annoying that Bo Nickal is getting all of these Dana White privileges. But at the same time, though, I kind of get it, considering that he is making a lot of improvements, and he is, I guess, a big star in the wrestling community that the UFC is trying to capture. Last but not least, we got Ronaldo Rodriguez. I'm putting him at the top, all right? This guy is completely unjustified for his Dana White privileges. Now, many of you might not know who he is because he's only fought twice in the UFC. But the guy came in, super hyped up Mexican prospect. Now, the difference between Ronaldo Rodriguez and the rest of the DEI privileged guys is because Ronaldo Rodriguez won a fight because he's from Mexico. Like, I thought that Ode Osborne beat Ronaldo Rodriguez in his debut, but then he got a matchup with Kevin Borjas. And let's be honest, the UFC probably thought that Ronaldo Rodriguez could beat Kevin Borjas, considering that Kevin Borjas didn't really look good in most of his fights. I will never understand why the UFC bothered to try and promote Ronaldo Rodriguez as this actual star, when in reality, he's nothing really impressive. Alright, so I overall feel like Ronaldo Rodriguez, not only does he have DEI privileges, he just was an unnecessary hype job that the UFC had no reason to invest in the first place. So for that reason, I think that Ronaldo Rodriguez getting all of the favorable privileges, like getting close scorecards scored to him automatically, I just feel like he has not cashed it in. And it's completely unjustified as to why he got all of these privileges. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys want to see more videos like this, please make sure to like and subscribe so we can monetize this channel. But otherwise, leave any comments down below what you guys think about this list, as well as any other video ideas you have for me. But other than that, like and subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.